Hey everyone, welcome back to this multi-part series where we're going to be walking through the AZ-104 Azure Administrator Lab exercises. The really nice thing about these labs is that it gives you that real-world hands-on experience to prepare for, say, the AZ-104 certification, or if you just want the necessary skills within compute, storage, and networking. We also have monitoring and identity labs as well. Within this lab, it is lab 3, and this is going to be broken into 4 different parts. So let me go ahead and show that screen. So what we can expect, right now I have my screen in split screen mode. So on the left I have the GitHub labs, and I'll provide that link to you all, and on the right I have my Azure Portal, and we are focused on module 3 currently. We can see this is broken up into 4 different parts. We're really starting with talking about managing resources within the Azure Portal. From there, we're going to use some of what we've created in part A to use our Azure Resource Manager Templates. And the nice thing about ARM templates is that it creates consistency across the board, along with, you're able to reuse these templates. From there, we'll discuss Azure PowerShell, and we'll conclude with our Azure CLI. So let's go ahead and get started with part A. So within this exercise and within our scenario, we are going to create resource groups, and we're going to deploy resources within that resource group. From there, we're going to move the resources between the resource groups that we would have created. In this case, our resource is going to be a disk, as we can see here. So another thing when it comes to moving your resources is there's a limitation with your resource group in that you cannot rename a resource group. So say you have resource group A, but you really want it being called resource group B. For you to change the name, you need to create resource group B and move all of the resources within resource group A to B, and that's your way of renaming your resource group. Okay, so first we're going to go to the portal, so that's portal.azure.com, and I'm going to navigate to disks. I'll go ahead and create a disk. And from here, I want to go ahead and create a new resource group. I'm going to call it AZ-104-03A-RG1. Go ahead and select OK. From here, I'm also going to call my disk AZ-104-03A-disk1. I'm going to choose to deploy this within East US, and I'm not going to specify an availability zone or a source type. I'm going to change this size, so instead of this premium SSD, I'm going to choose the standard HDD, and I want 32 gigs for that. From here, this is all that's necessary in order to create our managed disk. Of course, we have the ability to specify encryption, networking, there's some advanced settings along with our tags, but for now I'm going to go ahead and review and create. Make sure this passes the validation, and I'll go ahead and create. Okay, so what we have done so far, we've created a resource group, and once this deployment has completed, we'll go into it. We've created a resource group that contains this disk. So I can navigate to my resource group by going ahead and selecting resource group, this link that is right next to, or that is within the overview blade. I'll go ahead and go into the resource group, and I want to select this disk and choose move. And I want to move this to another resource group, but note we also have the ability to move this to another subscription or another region as well. So here I'm going to create my new resource group, and I'm going to call it AZ-104-03A RG2. Go ahead and select OK. Next, this is doing a validation to make sure that this disk can indeed be moved. Okay. So the check has been completed. I'm going to go ahead and select next. We will review, and I need to select this. I understand that tools and scripts associated with moved resources will not work until I update them with the new resource IDs. So that's fine. I'm going to check that, and I need to do that in order to move these resources. So this is going to take some time, but we can go ahead and move to the next task where we are implementing our resource locks. So I'm going to navigate back to disks, and I'm going to create a new disk. Of course, I'm specifying my subscription. And I'm going to create a new resource group, and I'm going to call this AZ-104-03-RG3. Oh no, that didn't, okay. There we go. Also note, if I were to try to create a new resource group with the same name, we cannot have that within our subscription. We need to have unique resource group names in our subscription. So just a quick note. Go ahead and select OK. I'm going to call this disk AZ-104-03A-disk2. For my region, I'm keeping it for East US, doing none for the availability zone along with the source type. And again, I'm changing my disk size to the standard HDD and specifying 32 gigabytes. From here, I'll go ahead and review and create. And create. Once this has deployed, I'm going to navigate to the disk by saying go to resource. And again, on this overview blade, I'm going to choose the resource group that I just created. Now, I'm going to implement my locks. So I need to select locks under this settings. I'm going to highlight here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a lock. I'm going to call it AZ-104-03A-delete-lock. And by default, the lock type is read-only, but we want a delete lock, meaning it's going to prevent our resources within our resource group from being deleted, along with our resource group overall. So I'll go ahead and select OK. So I can navigate back to the overview blade. Notice if I were to try to delete this resource group, it's going to say specify the resource group. This is really saying, hey, make sure that you know what you're about to do. What you're about to do is not, is irreversible. So let's go ahead and say delete. And oh snap, we're getting this error. Why? Because we have created our lock. So if you made it this far and you got this error, congrats. This is good for the lab purpose. We demonstrated how our delete lock is preventing our resource group and our resources from being deleted. Okay, so the next thing that we're really demonstrating is the way that the delete lock works, and that it's really only preventing deletions as compared to read-only, where that's all you can do. You can't modify your resources. So I'm going to go to my disk and I'm going to choose settings and size and performance to go ahead and resize my disk. Go ahead and resize and notice that this is going to be successful. But say we use the read-only lock on our resource group, we wouldn't be able to change the size of our disk. Okay, so for the cleanup in this section, we're only removing the resource lock that we created. So I'm going to navigate back to my resource group and select locks. And I'll go ahead and delete from here. And we're good to go. Let's go ahead and move into the second part, part B of Lab 3. Before I do so, let's do a quick overview of what we have done within part A. So we started with creating our resource groups, resource group 1 and 2, and we specified and deployed a disk into resource group 1. We were able to move that disk into a secondary resource group. Within task 3, we created an additional resource group. We deployed another disk to resource group 3, and we applied a lock to this resource group. We saw when we tried to delete the resource group, we weren't able to because we applied that delete lock. But we were able to resize our disk. So let's go ahead and move into part B. And this is really all about using our Azure Resource Manager templates. So our scenario is that we are provisioning resources and we're organizing them using the portal, but we need to do essentially what we've just done by using Azure Resource Manager templates. Here's the overall architecture diagram. Notice we will be using the resource groups that we created previously, or at least one of them, along with the disk. And we're going to leverage this template that will be created for us because of the deployment we have done within the portal. We're going to edit that template and deploy another resource group which contains a disk. Okay, so let's go ahead and navigate to our resource group 1. So I'm going to select deployments under settings, select this Microsoft.manage disk followed by some numbers, and choose template, the template blade on the left. I'm going to choose to download, and we can see the template listed here with all of our parameters. And soon we're going to edit this. Next I want to go to the inputs. I want to be mindful of this location parameter because we're going to use it in a moment. So let me go ahead and navigate to my downloads. So next in task 2, we are going to search at this top search bar for deploy a custom template. From here, I'm going to choose to build my own template in the editor, and I'm going to load a file. The file that I'm going to load is the template JSON that I downloaded previously. We want this template. Once we have opened up this template JSON file, I want to remove the source resource ID, the source URI, and the OS type. I also want to scroll down and delete the Hyper-V generation. And lastly, I want to go ahead and delete the OS type. From properties. I'll go ahead and select Save. And the reason we're deleting this is because it's not needed for this deployment. So I want to go ahead and select Edit Parameters. And I want to load my file. And here I'm going to be uploading my parameters JSON. I'll go ahead and select Save. So from here, we want to, of course, specify our subscription. We will be creating a new resource group called AZ-104-03B-RG2. Oh, excuse me, -RG1. And I'll go ahead and select OK. For our region, we can choose one that would be available. I use East US as this is what's closest to me. For our disk name, I'm going to call it AZ-104-03B-disk1. For our location, I'm going to continue and use that East US location, and that was what we saw from the location parameter in our previous step. For our SKU, I'm going to keep it for the standard LRS, along with my disk size, creation option, disk encryption set, and my network access policy. From here, I'll go ahead and review and create, and this will run its validation. It's passed, so I'll go ahead and create. Nice, we can go into this resource. I'm going to navigate to the resource group that we created. And I'm going to select Settings. Under Settings, select Deployments. And from here, I can select the Microsoft.template. And I'm able to review input and the template blade. Wonderful. So let's do a quick review of what we have done within Lab B, 3B. I'll copy the link. Let's open it in the bigger. Alrighty, so we utilized the resource group and the disk that we deployed in part A. We used that JSON template and edited it to create a new deployment where we created a new resource group along with a new disk. Okay, let us continue on to part C. Okay, so within part C, we are going to be using Azure PowerShell, and this is going to be used to deploy our resources. The really nice thing about using the Azure Portal is the Cloud Shell, the Azure Cloud Shell option that you have, so you don't need to install Azure PowerShell locally. However, you can choose to do that and work through the exercises that way if you choose to as well. So let's see at a high level our architecture diagram so we can see we're really creating our resource group and deploying a disk within that resource group by using Azure PowerShell. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm going to start by selecting this Cloud Shell icon at the very top right next to the search bar. I'm going to make this in full screen mode. And we want to make sure that we're in PowerShell as compared to Bash, which we will use in a moment. From here, we want to go ahead and create our resource group. Remember, we need our resource group in order to deploy our resources. So I'm going to create a variable called location and set it equal to get AZ resource group. We're going to use the flag name. We're going to call it AZ-104-03B-RG1 dot location. Okay, now we want to go ahead and create a resource group. We're going to create a variable called RGName. And we'll set it equal to AZ-104-03C-RG1. And we're going to say new -AZ resource group -name. Use the variable that we've just created called RGName. Set the location equal to the location variable that we created previously as well. Okay, so within this first step, we could have set the location and said location equal to East US because that's the location I used previously, but here we're really referencing the location that was used for this AZ-104-03B resource group 1. Okay, so this was successful. Next, I'm going to go ahead and say get AZ resource group -name, and I'm going to reference the resource group name that I created previously. Say RGName. Okay. Essentially, step 2 is kind of a duplicate of what is already provided after we have created our new Azure resource group, but in following the steps, that's what it asks us to do. From here, we can create a new disk. So the same way we created a disk within the portal, we're using Azure PowerShell to create our disk. So I'm going to create a variable called disk config. I'm saying new AZ disk config. And in order to go to a new line, I'm going to do this backtick. Go to a new line without actually hitting enter. Location set as location using the variable that I've created previously. For my create option, it's going to be empty. For my disk size, I want 32. For my SKU, my stock keeping unit, I'm going to use the standard LRS. Go ahead and select enter. Great. Next, I'm going to create my disk name. So I'm going to create a variable called disk name and call it AZ-104-03C-disk1. And I'll go ahead and create my new disk by using the variables that I've previously specified. So for our resource group name, I'm going to set it to the RG name that we've created within the first step. And for my disk, I'm going to reference the disk config variable that I've created above. We can see I actually missed this second step where I needed to specify the disk name. The nice thing about Azure PowerShell is rather than throwing an error and saying, that's not right, try again, it's saying, hey, you need to provide a disk name. Specify your disk name here. So let's see if I can use my variable that I've created. That might not work. Let me just go ahead and specify the disk name as AZ-104-03C-disk1. So we can see that was successful. And we have created our resource group 1, and it contains the disk called AZ-104-03C-disk1 along with our location. Here we can see the size of our disk that we have specified. We have confirmed that this was a successful deployment. If you wanted to get these results again, you could choose to say git-az disk, use the flag resource group name, specify the RG name variable, and use the disk name. But essentially it's going to provide us this output. Okay, so within task 3, we're going to go ahead and manage our disk by using Azure PowerShell. And in this case, previously we increased the size of our disk from 32 to 64 gigabytes within the portal. Now we want to use Azure PowerShell to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and say new. Let me clear this actually. Okay. I'm going to say new -az disk update config. Going to use the flag disk size gigabyte, and I want it to be 64. Going to use this pipe command and say update az disk. Going to specify my resource group along with my disk name. So I'll say resource group name, RG name, and say disk name, and use that variable called disk name. Awesome, that was successful. We can see here that our disk size is now 64 gigabytes. Nicely done. If we wanted to view the SKU, the stock keeping unit, we could go ahead and say git az disk, use the flag resource group name and the variable RG name and our disk name as well. Going to say .sku. Okay, so it's returned. We have confirmed that we did in fact use the standard LRS SKU. This next step, we want to go ahead and change the SKU from standard LRS to premium LRS. So I'll say new az disk update config. going to use the flag SKU and specify premium LRS. And this pipe will say update AZ disk, specify our resource group name, and our disk name. Nicely done. It was successful. We can confirm by running the previous command that we confirmed that this was in fact the standard LRS. And we can do that easily by using the up arrow. So I'm going to navigate to that last command we ran. And we can see that it has in fact changed from our standard LRS to our premium LRS. So congrats. That concludes part C. I'm pretty sure we're in part C. Okay, that concludes part C. So congratulations. As a quick overview, let me go ahead and reference our architecture diagram. It's fairly straightforward, fairly simple. What we did with this lab as compared to our previous labs is really utilize the PowerShell. Notice we didn't even use the portal as far as the interface. We really used PowerShell by using our Azure Cloud Shell. So let's go ahead and continue on, and we'll move to part D, where we are using the Azure CLI. Oh, interesting. I don't see the diagram here, but what we will be doing is essentially what we have done this entire lab. So what we've just done with our PowerShell, but instead we're using the CLI method. Okay, so I'm going to select PowerShell so I can switch to be in a Bash environment. I want to confirm. And I'm going to start by creating a variable called location. Set that equal to AZ group show name, and I'm going to create my what I'm doing right now is referencing the resource group that I created in the previous step. I'm going to reference its location, RG1, and I'll say query location out TSV. So notice I made a typo. Instead of AZ group show, I accidentally said shoe, but notice it's like, did you mean to say show? So I'm just going to select the up arrow while I'm in the Bash environment and use the left arrow to navigate and edit that to be show. Now I am going to create my resource group name, create the variable for it called RG name, set that equal to AZ-104-03D-RG1. And I'm going to say AZ group create, use the flag name, reference my variable that I created, along with my location. Nice. So we have successfully created our resource group within the East US region. and it gives us this output. If we wanted to display this output, we can say, or display this output again, I can say AZ group show name and reference the resource group name. Great. So next I want to go ahead and create my disk. Very similar to the way that I have done within PowerShell, but this time we are using Bash. So I'm going to say disk name is equal to AZ-104-03D-disk1, and I'm going, okay, notice it says disk name command not found. So if you're putting spaces, you want to make sure that you are not doing that. Okay. Next, I'm going to say AZ disk create, and similar to how we use the backtick in PowerShell to move to the new line, I'm going to use this backslash. I'm going to reference my resource group name. Along with my disk name, my SKU, which I want as standard, LRS, and for my size, I want 32 gigs. Alrighty, this was successful. And we can see I'm going to scroll up. Okay, most of this is null here. But if I scroll down to, I can see my SKU. I can see the name of my disk along with the resource group that it was deployed to. And lastly, right here, so we can see it, we can see our disk size right here within our output. Within task 3, we want to go ahead and increase this disk size from 32 gigabytes to 64 gigabytes. So we're going to run this AZ disk update and change the size to 64. So let me go ahead and clear this. I'm going to say AZ disk update. Just use the resource group. Name along with the disk name. And from there, we're going to set the size to 64. Okay, this was successful. If I wanted to redisplay this output, we could use this AZ disk show. But to confirm, I can scroll up and I can see right here my disk size is now 64 gigabytes. If we wanted to go ahead and change our SKU from standard to our premium, so right now we can see it's set to standard, we want to change it to premium. I am going to use this dash SKU. So to make it easier for myself, I'm going to reference the last command I wrote and change the end. Instead of saying size gigabyte, I'm going to use SKU and say premium LRS. Go ahead and select enter. Ta-da! Nicely done. So we can see we updated from our standard to our premium. And we confirmed with this output. Okay, so since this was the last part, let me double check that that is the case. Yes, that is the last part for module 3. Let's do a quick overview of what we did within this lab. Very similar to what we did with our PowerShell. Instead, we switched to be in a Bash session within our Azure Cloud Shell, which we can access at the very top right. We created a resource group, and within that resource group, we deployed a disk. From there, we wanted to change some of the properties of our disk, like the size, along with the SKU. And we did that all by using our Azure CLI. So let's go ahead and walk through this cleanup process. Which is typically the very last step of the labs. And the reason we want to clean up is so that we are not getting charged for any, we're not getting charged for our Azure resources, since this is really meant to be for practice purposes and demo purposes, so we can help preserve the credits that we have within our Azure subscription. So first I'm going to say AZ group list query. We're going to say starts with name AZ-104-03. And this is the benefit of having a naming convention, is that it's helpful to us with our management of our resources, such as cleaning up. Say name, output TSV, and we'll go ahead and delete AZ list, AZ group list query. Let me make sure. Oh, okay. So the reason because this command was meant to list all of what we've created within this lab, and we're querying it based off of the name here. But I have a typo, so that's why nothing was listed. So let me go ahead and change that typo. And we want it to say AZ. Okay, so now we've listed, we have part A, part B, and part C, and part D of what we've created within our lab. So we're just verifying, hey, this is what we want to go ahead and delete. So I'll go ahead and use the up arrow to reference what I've created, because we're really only changing the last part. We're adding this pipe command. I'm going to copy this over in case I make any typos to go ahead and delete these. Now mind you, if you had a resource group lock or any type of resource lock on your implemented, you would receive an error. Go ahead and paste. And this is going to take some time for this process to complete, because this is done asynchronously. Alrighty. Well, if you made it this far, I want to congratulate you on continuing your learning. I had a great time with you. We're going to move into our next part. So I'll see you then.